This is Identity at the Center.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
I'm pretty good. Yourself?
Good. So many ways I thought that we could start this episode. One was Happy New Year, but I think I'd be far in violation of saying Happy New Year since this episode goes live in February. But I thought I'd start with a pun because it's been so cold on the East Coast of the U.S. But you know what is hot right now? Authorization.
So hot right now. I think we need like what's the movie? I'm blanking on it now. Zoolander, right? It's so hot right now. Authorization.
Well, I think we should dive right into it because we've got a fantastic guest today.
Yeah, we've got a sponsor spotlight today. So these are the folks that help make this podcast available for so many people around the world, and definitely appreciate that. So it's a fully sponsored episode. We're going to get into it today with PlainID and really learn more about their solution. I've known Gal, our guest here, for at least a couple years now, kind of way back 2015, 2016, I feel like. Maybe it was somewhere around that time frame, but kind of a routine mainstay on the identity circuit. So if people want to learn more about PlainID, you can go to the website, plainid.com/IDAC. That's PLAINID.com/IDAC. So welcome to the show, Gal Helemski, the co-founder and CTO of PlainID.
Thank you. And it's very nice to be here again.
Yeah, the last time you were with us was way back in episode 218. I thought it was last year, but you corrected me and you're totally right. It was a couple years ago. We recorded live from Identiverse in one of the many conference rooms. And I don't remember if that was like Mandalay or if it was one of the other one of the hotels that we were kind of out there. But we had a great conversation around BAC, something based access control. I think I called it like StarBAC. So thank you for being part of this as well and coming back. So I got to ask you first question is like, all right, so why are you back? Why are we doing this episode?
Oh, okay. Excellent question to start with. So first of all, because I want to say that today authorization is a security decision. If in the past we struggled with which method to implement and even if to implement at all, that's no longer the case. Today, authorization is a security decision. Either you're secured or not. And we'll see why is that.
That's a pretty simple statement, but it carries so many repercussions, right? It's like, okay, authorization is really the crux of what identity and access management is built around. You got to get it right. So tell me a little bit more about PlainID for people who aren't familiar out there and the billions of listeners and watchers that we have. What is PlainID?
Okay, sure. So PlainID is the authorization company. We are focused primarily on authorization, controlling authorization, managing authorization, providing authorizations. We have been focused in that space for quite some time, and we work with large enterprises that trust our technology to manage and control their authorization solution. That's PlainID, and we'll learn more as we speak.
We're definitely going to learn more about it, especially sort of like how does it look in sort of the real world and how it works like architecturally, right, within an environment.
Sure.
I got to ask though, how'd you come up with the name PlainID?
Okay, so you know how in identity and access management, there are so many aspects and it starts with maybe something simpler and gets so complicated. Authorization traditionally is considered the most complicated area. We wanted to simplify that and therefore PlainID. Why ID, that's a different question, but still, we wanted to resonate something which is simpler, solving a complex problem in a simpler way.
I love it. It's a noble cause. It's a hard one to address because I think
Yes.
authorizations get super complex sometimes, especially some applications.
Absolutely.
What is it that you think makes PlainID separate itself from others that are in the market? Because I know there's a lot of different kind of vendors, right, in the authorization space. You guys have been around for a long time at this point. What is it that makes your solution unique? As I put my jaded CISO hat on, like, all right, great, another tool in the stack that I have to think about.
Yeah, so I believe it's the completeness of the solution, and I'll explain. Again, authorization, like I said, is the security decision, which means it's not a developer's decision. It's eventually a CISO decision. The authorization is meant to represent what can be done within our technology space, which basically translates into what data can be accessed, what tools, what APIs, what services can be used, who's making those decisions. Someone needs to make them, someone needs to govern them, and that's typically responsibility of the security. PlainID places a lot of focus on managing and providing visibility into those authorization policies, as well as enforcing them, providing the tools, the means to enforce them across the technology. I would say this is one of our major differentiators, our ability to see, to capture that whole scope of authorizations, not just one side of that challenge space.
So authorization stretches beyond just people, right? It gets into other things. So I'm curious, is PlainID addressing both like customer identity and access management use cases? Is it workforce? Is it both? And then how does it get into non-humans or maybe agentic and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, the answer is all of them. Why? Because they are all identities that need access. That's the bottom line. And eventually, when you want to work within your application space, data, APIs, it doesn't really matter to the data if it's an end user, a human who's trying to access, or an application user, or even an agent user. It's a user, an identity that tries to access the data or tries to consume the API or whatever. So an identity is an identity. By the way, it's the responsibility of all those IDPs to make sure the identity is there and it's authenticated and all of that. But then what happens afterwards? Afterwards, those identities need the right access for whatever they're doing. And in some cases, maybe the combination of identities, like in the agentic area, there's the agent identity and the end user identity. So, very shortly, all identities count, all identities need to be authorized.
Hey, Gal, I was so intrigued by what you said about authorization having an important role in the security stack. I was wondering if
Mhm.
maybe you could talk a little bit more about that and what it is that you were talking about.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for that question. So, the market has been investing a lot around managing identities, whether human, non-human, authenticating identities. So we have all those controls in place. So our users are accessing the applications or, all of our technology stack after they have gone through multiple multi-factor authentications. But then what? How can we control what they can do, what they can see? That's where authorization comes in. It's like the last line of defense before accessing data and accessing all those tools and services. Why is it such an important topic now? Because the change in the market towards agentic flows. That's when explosion of data usage, tool usage, API usage happens, and no longer traditional controls are sufficient. We cannot rely just on having an identity or having the identity authenticated. The controls must be implemented in the right way. So the need for those controls are tripled even than they were before. That's why I'm saying it's a security decision. Every organization is evolving towards newer technologies, more specifically the agentic space, and authorization is a crucial component to secure that.
So, Gal, you brought up an interesting topic there, just authentication, right? And I realized that maybe we jumped right in because I think this is a topic that, authentication, authorization, people get confounded sometimes or lump them together. And I think you see it even with some of the protocols where like the authorization data will get lumped in with the passing of the token. You got OpenID, you've got OAuth. They're different, but unless you kind of are an expert in those areas, you might get them lumped together. Why is it that you think people, or maybe you could just kind of start with the separation of the two, and then why do people get them lumped together?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, they should be lumped together because it's a continuous process. Basically, authentication, right, defines who you are, but then authorization comes and says, what can you do? Now, if we rely just on authentication, it means who I am also carries what I do. So I'm walking around with a bag of privileges, which basically beats the purpose, right? We are now talking about zero standing privileges, which means who I am is just who I am. It doesn't mean what I can do. As I walk through in the application, as I try to access data, as I try to consume services, that's when I need to determine if that is approved for me in the context which I'm working in, right? So there must be a very distinct separation between authentication, who you are, and then the continuous process of authorization. What can you do? But what can you do in a specific context which you're currently operating? It cannot be predefined, cannot be predetermined. Hope it makes sense.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. Thank you. And Jeff and I often say, and not just because you're here, right, is that authorization's having its day in the sun. You see the Authn working group, part of the OpenID Foundation. You see just so many more authorization vendors and focus at the identity conferences. I see you guys are still the lead in terms of kind of like pushing this boundary. But I guess my question is, why is it that it's so hot right now? And I say that because you guys have been around for decades, right? I mean, we didn't really get into what year you founded the company, but I feel like you guys have been around for most of my 20 years in the space. And why is it that right now it's getting this special attention?
Yeah. Well, first of all, maybe not decades, but we do like to speak a lot, so we make a lot of noise. But thank you. I think the reason for the importance of now, why now is the moment, it's because the shift in technology. Authorization has always been the challenging part of identity and access management. And when it comes to traditional technology, it's complex. But when we are starting to look at a newer technology, APIs, microservices, and now the agentic space, that when it becomes easier to implement more advanced controls. So that's the reason it's a hot topic now. Additionally, as the technology progress, as we see, again, I'm back to AI agents all the time because that's the hot topic now. Yes. So as we see AI agent operates, what does it mean from technology perspective? It means a whole lot of little steps that are combined together to make something happen. And that means each and every one of those small steps in the process need to be authorized, not just authenticated, but needs to be authorized. And static standing permissions cannot address that. That's why the need for a true authorization system, dynamic, context aware, is very, very much relevant for this time, which we are in.
So I think people are probably pretty familiar with authorization, at least the concept, especially when you start talking about humans. I want to get
Yes.
specifically into like agentic AI because that is the other thing that's so hot right now, right? Is there are this explosion of agents that are running around, sometimes amok inside of an organization
Yeah.
with poorly scoped permissions or whatever it may be. Can you talk about authorization specifically in the context of agentic AI and sort of how does PlainID help me address that, govern it, solve for it, things like that?
Yes, absolutely. So there are several aspects to consider. First of all, who are we authorizing? When it comes to the agentic process, we need to remember there are several identity types, I would say. First of all, there is the agent, of course, the agent identity, but there is also the end user identity. Always at least, or well, sometimes just one, but there can be two identities to consider. So when we are authorizing an action or access to something, we need to be able to evaluate both identities. PlainID, of course, can do that. Second, when do we need to apply controls? Looking at the full agentic flow, we have multiple control points to consider. It starts with a prompt. So every process starts with a prompt. The first control point is at that point exactly. Can whoever is asking the question or whoever is initiating the prompt actually do that according to the security controls. In many cases, people are talking about guardrails. Guardrails tend to be very operational in nature, but think about security guardrails. Those would be your authorization decisions. So again, one, the prompt. Second, data. An agentic flow retrieves data, whether it's via RAG or whatever other means, right? Data feeds into that flow. What data can be fed in the context of the end user identity and the agent identity? Then, based on the question, the prompt, and the data, a process is generated. The LLM is digesting all of that, and then the LLM might reach out to tools. You've probably heard of MCP, the standard for utilizing tools in the agentic space. So again, the question is, can the agent at this point of time use those set of tools, or which tools they can use? So we want to put some controls on tools as well. And the last part of that is the response. A response is being generated. Maybe some of that response can expose data it shouldn't. So we want to consider masking the response. PlainID today has the capability to control what questions can be asked, filter out the data which is fed into the process, control the usage of MCP tools, and mask the response that is sent back to the user. So end-to-end control throughout the agentic flow. And that's part of what an advanced authorization solution needs to do. Cannot be done by just static permissions, needs to be governed by policies.
So you mentioned the word guardrails, and I've heard this a lot, and I wonder, is it guardrails or is it more of a railroad track? Because guardrails is kind of like, all right, it could be a 2-lane highway, it could be a 1-lane highway, it could be a 8-lane highway with a lot of, swerve in between all that. And I wonder, do you have, a different definition or distinction between something maybe that is from an authorization standpoint is, okay, is it guardrails or is it like a railroad track or maybe a roller coaster track, depending on how you want to perceive that?
Yeah, I think it's a term the market has started using. It tends to be a more of a technical thing. It is very common to implement guardrails for prompt control, for output control. So we are, we are aligning ourselves with the way the market is currently speaking. Basically, it's a way to place controls. So controls are placed in the form of guardrails, and they can be placed on the process, throughout the process, input, output, data, and tools. But I agree with the the picture you draw. Absolutely.
Well, I think, when you have guardrails, especially when we're talking about agentic and generative AI, you almost need some leeway, right? Otherwise, you kind of lose the benefits of having something that's generating that. So I just kind of brought it up because I was like, okay, well, I can see some people thinking out there is like, okay, well, should an authorization be like a single track? Well, you can only do this one thing. But I guess my next question is there a right way to provide agentic authorization? Because you talked about, the question is, can the person who is invoking the agent do the thing that you're asking it to do? So if I write an agent, does the agent mirror my permissions? Should it have its own set of permissions? What happens if the agent creates its own agent? And now you've got like this domino effect of agents creating agents. How do you track permissions throughout that? And is there a right way in your mind of kind of how to control that?
Yeah. So, I think you asked me just, 4 or 5 questions, but I'll try to answer.
I'm great at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so first of all, you need to consider all identities involved in the context of the operation. So if there is an end user identity and an agent identity that is currently doing whatever operation, in the decisioning process, both should be considered. You can't consider just one of them. Yes, an agent identity has authorizations tied to it. Yes, an end user identity has different set of authorization tied to it. You need to consider that they both have more than just what is needed for that specific operation. And you know what? That leads me to what is the right method to control it all and to manage it all. You know how the IAM market likes to create new acronyms every year? So we have a new one. It's called intent-based access control. No, truly, this is an important one to remember. Eventually, to do the right authorization process, you need to understand intent. And that means there is a specific agent designed for a specific purpose. Now, there might be a human who's using that agent or another agent who's initiating that agent. That's part of the intent. The second part is, what are they trying to do? And then the last part is, why are they doing that now? So in order to truly enforce zero standing privileges, truly enforce security controls in the agentic flow, you need to consider all of those aspects. You need and to understand the intent of the operation and enforce accordingly.
So, Gal, I want to come back to intent-based access control because I think it's a fascinating topic, but I want to key on something you said to Jeff's question. So first, kind of the basis of my thought is a year ago, we were talking about IAM for AI, and essentially what it boiled down to was like authentication to your AI. And I was like, that's not very exciting. But what you just said there was like, I was like, that's the hard part. I mean, that is the really hard part, where you start talking about controlling what questions people can ask. And maybe this kind of blurs into the intent, but I figured the way I'd ask the question is this, is because you talked about addressing it with policy. And I'm wondering, as you talk about this solution with customers or potential customers, are they presenting the same use cases? Are you seeing the same use cases, or are people, each client giving you kind of a different set of use cases that, hey, they need to solve, and policy solves that?
Yeah. So really excellent question. First of all, I want to say this is across the board. Every customer I'm speaking with, same challenges. They all want to adopt agents. They want to enable their organization to adopt agents, but then they need to do that in a secured way. And they need a way to govern all those agents. I would even say many consider agent as a new type of employees. Remember how, I don't know how many years ago, we had to take care of our human employees, and IAM struggled around that, and we built a lot of technologies to solve that. And the thing about human employees, they do follow some, pre-built controls, right? If we see a locked room, we are part of an organization, we wouldn't just walk in there. That's not the case with agents. That's really important to understand. Agents are your new type of employees, but they're very excited. They are like junior, excited employees that are meant to please. They are designed to provide you with a solution. They will do whatever they can, whatever is available to them, they would utilize in order to provide a solution. And that means if they have more privileges they should use, they can access more data than they should use, they would do that. And that would lead to either misuse of capabilities or data exposure eventually. That would be the reality. So that's why you need to treat those AI agents as a new type of employees and apply controls on top of them, but also understand that your traditional solutions are not sufficient. You need to apply the right controls here. And back to your question, yes, this is something I'm hearing across the board. I'm speaking with a lot of organizations, both from current customers and potential new customers, and they all have the same challenge. How do I control all those AI agents? How do I control what they do? How do I control what they expose? Because data exposure is certainly one of the biggest risks in this space.
Can you, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but could you give me kind of a a real world use case where, people are finding like, oh, applying these policies is something I can really do to enhance the security of my AI agents.
hmm Yeah, absolutely. So, let's start with very simple policy. First of all, let's prevent exposure of PII data. Just start with that. Any, I don't know, social security number or numbers you don't want to be exposed or whatever, just start with applying that as a general rule. Mask all PII data from your AI agents. Simple, okay? But other controls that I see being implemented, controls such as cross-border controls. You want your AI agents to serve all of your employees in your companies or your partners or your customers, right? But you want to restrict access to data from different locations. Again, cross-border control, this is one of the top compliance requirements in many organizations. There's so much relevant here as well, because the same data exposure that you could have gotten with previous technologies without agentic are still very much relevant here. If you have like, I don't know, MNPI data, again, exposure of data, don't expose data. Take your most critical compliance policies, apply them at the beginning of your agentic journey.
So you mentioned the intent based access control.
hmm
I mean, it kind of sounded a little bit like it could be what you're talking about now, or that it could be something different. Which is it?
Yeah. So I think intent eventually is a way to achieve that target. It's a way to achieve zero standing privileges. So I spoke before about zero standing privileges. It basically means you enter the operation with nothing, and then at each step, it is determined what you can do. Right? That's zero standing privileges. How do you apply true standing privileges with intent-based access control, which is basically a nice name of saying consider everything when you give an access permission or reject that access permission, which means consider the identity, both end user identity, agent identity, consider what they're trying to do, what they're trying to access, why are they doing that now in this context. That's intent-based access control. So achieving zero standing privileges with intent-based access control.
Yeah, and it feels like everybody is trying to achieve zero standing privileges, right?
Yes.
Because when you have standing privileges, if accounts get compromised, it could be very destructive in your environment. My concern with zero standing privileges has always been how scalable is it? Do you just kind of go after zero standing privileges for your key applications, maybe for your most critical apps or your most critical accounts within those apps?
hmm
What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think that's a very true question. Every organization considers because, I mean, you wouldn't want to change everything. So yes, prioritize what you want to start with, and then implement accordingly. That's why new technologies are a good place to start. I mean, we know we have done in the past bad implementations. We didn't implement the sufficient controls where they needed to be, right? But now we have a chance with new technologies to do that right. So consider implementing as part of the development process, as part of the adoption of new technologies, meaning agentic AI, deploy that with the right controls in place. Don't do the mistakes, don't repeat the mistakes we have been doing over and over and over again, which means let's deploy our agentic AI and then let's go back to security and figure out how to fix it. No, let's not do that. We know what we need to do. We have the market has a lot of experience. We know we need authentication. We know we need authorization. Going back to it is a security decision. Let's make those decisions now and start from scratch the right way.
Yeah, I think you made a great point there. So if I was to put it into my own words, it would essentially be you might the scalability part really, or it's the effort to go and do it for everything you've done the wrong way, and not because we're dumb or anything, but sometimes the technology wasn't there. Look, it's evolving quickly, and we all are under. But if we get that infrastructure, if we get it right now, and build it in, bake it in as part of the deployment process and our standard security footprint, at least we'll get it right going forward. So um, I think that's a great way to look at it. The other conversation that often kind of accompanies zero standing privileges is around continuous identity, continuous authentication. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I think the way I see that and the way the market typically speaks about that, continuous authentication, continuous identity represents the process, the identity, any identity goes through in its digital journey, which means it always starts with a defined identity, authentication, and then authorization, right? That's continuous because it doesn't end with authentication. It's not sufficient to know who you are. Also need to know what can you do. Can you see this piece of data? Can you access that tool or API? Right? Those are questions being asked throughout the process. And that's what makes the process continuous. It starts with authentication, it proceeds with authorization, and that's eventually what makes the full process secured.
I'd like to take this from theory to reality. What does it look like when I set up PlainID in my environment? Like, what does this look like
Mhm,
architecturally? Is this an app that I run? Is it SaaS? Is it something
mhm.
on-prem? How does this connect to my other stuff? Like, let's start with, okay, you've got me hooked, Gal. Let's try this out. Like, what's next?
Well, first of all, happy to speak with you. Next step, we are a full SaaS solution. We do have hybrid components. Many of our customers prefer the decisioning engine and access to data to be localized. So those would typically be implemented as hybrid component, microservices, designed to scale, designed for performance and security. So setting up the tenant, getting all those hybrid components in place, and then you go through a process of discovery. Once you have discovery done, you can see all your um, ready-to-use policy elements. What would those be? Well, maybe your database tables. If it's vector databases, then it's all the categories that define the documents. If it's MCP, all the MCP tools already categorized, by the way, so it would be easy to authorize them. All your identities, of course, and then it's just a matter of connecting between the two, which are the policies eventually. Policies, connection between identities to what identities can access, and adding some conditions on top.
So you talked about this being a hybrid approach. Let's start with the on-prem stuff. You mentioned some things that I have to install in my environment to connect. Pretty common, I think, for most identity tools to have like some sort of proxy tool or connectivity sort of
Yeah.
server that they can use. How does that work? Is it a virtual appliance? I set it up and then it's scanning my internal environment for permissions. Do I connect it to things like SAP? Like, how does that work? Take me a little more behind the scenes.
Yeah, so it's a containerized by the way, it's an optional component, right? You can do full SaaS and it works perfectly, but you can also choose that localized component. It's a container, basically, microservice deployed however you want, wherever you want, how many you want, by the way. And it has the function of a discovery. So it kind of scans whatever you want it to scan to fetch the elements. We call them assets, so those would be your protected assets. Feeds them into the policy platform, and then it supports enforcement and enforces data. That would typically, and again, this is a bit of a technical jargon, so excuse me, but it includes a PDP, policy decision point, PIP, policy information point. That's the component that connects to the data sources, and the enforcement components. We call them, again, in the regular jargon, PEP, Policy Enforcement Point, but we like to call them authorizers. And those are components per technology. So for API gateways, a sidecar for your service mesh, whatever library for your development platform, and so on. We have many of those available.
So how does this work from like a real-time scanning for, setup, right? Permissions change all the time. Are you detecting changes of permissions within applications and then pulling those into PlainID and then the PDP or PEP, and now you're speaking language, right? Policy-based access control, right? Those different terms.
Yeah.
We've got a technical audience, right? They're probably following along. But how do you stay on top of things that might be changing in environment? Is this scanning at real time, or is it like once a day, once a week, or is it like on demand?
It's on request, actually. So we have the PIP component I mentioned before. It has the ability to connect to data sources. So let's say it connects to your IGA platform, or maybe to your HR repository, or maybe to certification system, or to all of the above, right? It pulls data in real time at the time of access. So let's say you're trying to access an application or database or whatever, right? So we can see that now you are defined as an employee in this department and, in this region, and make the decision accordingly. So it's true real-time decisioning process according to a set of attributes which are out there. We are not replicating any data, only for caching purposes, but that's on the technical discussion. So we are just pulling data when the data is needed to make the decision.
So if I think about this from like a UML diagram, right, with things bouncing back and forth, I'm doing the authentication against my IDP, and
Mhm,
then I pull it back, and it's like, okay, now where does the policy-based authorization component come in? Is it
mhm,
as soon as I try to authenticate, or is it when I try to reach a specific application? How does that
mhm.
chain of events occur?
Okay, so there are multiple patterns to follow. The first pattern, I'll try to quickly review some of them. So the first pattern is, yes, during authentication process. So when the IDP creates the authentication token, it is possible to reach out to the policy decision point to get a list of authorization values, like claim keys, claim values, and so on. This would be enriching the token. That is typically called a token enrichment pattern, and it is part of login time authorization. So one pattern. Second pattern would be at your, let's say, API gateway. So whenever there is a transaction through the API gateway, the transaction is being evaluated against the policy with the addition of attributes as much as needed, and then the transaction is either allowed to proceed or blocked. Another pattern would be an application trying to access a database. So the application sends a query. Let's say it sends select all from table, no boundaries at all, no controls. We capture that and we add those controls according to the policy. So select all from table, but where location equals user location or whatever, you see? That's an example. Dynamic authorization can be positioned in all of those different locations, and there are other patterns as well. Didn't mention all of them, but we start with very coarse-grained at login time to be governed by policy, to provide decisions dynamically, and we go all the way to very fine-grained at the data level, so row level, filtering, and column masking.
I was reading your body language there, Gal, when Jeff was asking that question. You're like, "Oh, you want to go deep," and it was a great question. I'm sitting here enjoying the whole thing. My question is a little less technical, which is kind of from what you see with a typical customer approach. Is it they want to start off with one application, or kind of how do they look at like, I want to kind of test this and proof of concept, or you know I want to get my feet wet before I dive completely in. So how do people start?
Yes. So yes, typically with one application, maybe two, but you want to start, small because you want to see value as quick as possible. Let's say you want to start with an API use case. So just get your Swagger file, open a API spec, whatever, send it over. It automatically maps to the policy elements and start enforcing policies. This is, by the way, with no change of code. It's so simple to implement. And there you go. You have your fine-grained controls at the business logic level, not just at the API level. Let's say you want to do the same with the data controls. So it's a matter of discovering data structure, feeding that into the policy, what we call policy building blocks, and start building your policies. Obviously, some implementation processes are more complex than others. No magic in technology. I wish there were, but no, that's not the case. But we are trying to make it as simple as possible. So back to our company name, PlainID, we are trying to make authorization as simple as possible so they will truly be implemented where they needed to be.
So can PlainID replace or centralize authorizations? Similar to how a lot of organizations might use like Active Directory groups, right, as how they authenticate or sorry, authorize into applications.
Yeah.
Can PlainID act as that role, or is it more on the policy side and relies on authorizations existing within an app? Can
Yeah.
I
So
shortcut essentially and say, okay, people, stop building your own authorization and let me centralize that and manage that for you as part of my IAM program? Does that make sense?
yeah, it absolutely makes sense. And yes, I do want to repeat that. People, stop building your own authorizations. There are authorization solutions such as PlainID. Start using them. You don't need to build it by yourselves. However, it's not an Active Directory or an Entra ID replacement because the example which you gave is providing users with roles or with group that is always still needed. Policies, authorization in general, they do not replace roles. They do reduce the need, the amount of them, but they do not replace them. Think of a role as an addition attribute on the identity, more information. Typically, the information which identity holds is limited to, I don't know, job title, department, location, and that's it. It's not sufficient when it comes to making decisions on which data you can access or whatever, right? So that's where roles would come in or other ways of enriching user data. So those would be all feeds to the policy.
So how do your customers typically measure that they're getting what they paid for out of this, right? How do they measure success with a solution? I would assume faster, more streamlined, more secure authorizations. But are there other ROIs that people look for when they say, okay, we've got PlainID, here's how we justified the spend?
Yes, absolutely. So there are multiple metrics we can share, but I want to share one example. We have a customer which is a global bank, and they implemented their whole like online banking controls with PlainID. They used us at the API gateway level, several API gateways. And initially, like every new technology, there is some resistance, don't know if that's the right solution, and so on. Today, they're at a point where the developer team, the application team, they are excited to, send their APIs to the security team. Here you go. We want to deploy this API. Just plug into your policy and that's it. So it really reduced time to market for them. Every new API doesn't need to consider who the identity is. Does this identity can see this data or whatever? No, they were focused on business logic they had to develop. And all the enforcement was done by PlainID together with their API gateway in a very simplified way. And it really helped them provide faster value to their business.
Well, as we kind of let off the episode, right? Authorization is so hot right now. So
Yes.
I feel like we need the Zoolander memes, in full force here. This has been a great conversation, and I would definitely encourage people go check out plainid.com/IDAC, right? And check out what is going on there. I think, Gal, you wrote a blog on the intent-based access control. And so
Mhm.
I think that'll be on that page for people to check out. there's so much to unpack here, but hopefully this gives people kind of a sense of what they should be thinking about. So I want to end the episode on a little bit of a lighter note. We actually started to nerd out very, very slightly before we hit record when you mentioned that you're into science fiction and reading and things like that. And I am as well, more on the listening side than the reading side. And so I want to ask you for either a recommendation for me or other people. I know there's a lot of sci-fi readers out there. What's the best sci-fi book that you've read within the last year or so that people should be checking out if they haven't already?
Uh, okay, we'll continue that discussions for sure. So I want to recommend an old book, Isaac Asimov. So years ago, I really enjoyed reading those books. I read them in cycle. And everything that's happening now with the agentic stuff made me go back to those books. The one I just completed is Caves of Steel, the first in the robot series, I believe. I really recommend reading it again, and the full series, by the way, because it's really nice. You know, he saw something that's happening now. He saw that years ago. A lot of the stuff that he was writing about, I mean, people that are not familiar with Asimov would probably say, this is not sci-fi. What are you talking about? But it is. It truly is. It was written like, I don't know, 40 years ago, something like that, maybe more. So it's really interesting to see the way he thought and how, he thought technology would evolve. Um, and especially what truly happened and maybe where things did not happen as he predicted. And by the way, you know what's so intriguing about Asimov when he wrote the robot series? He actually placed the three robot rules, right? So he actually defined robots with guardrails by definition that cannot be overcome. Obviously, as it evolved, another rule was added, but still, it's really nice to go back to those books.
So you mentioned Asimov, and I feel like anything can be science fiction if you put your mind to it.
Yes.
But
Yes.
the Foundation series is one that I've always enjoyed, and now Apple TV has a series on it, which I think is great. I'm not sure if you've checked that out yet, but Foundation is definitely a good one too. Have you ever read the Bobiverse series of books?
Um, Not sure.
Okay. So this is one of my favorite series, I think, of all time in science fiction. And it kind of follows the story of essentially an agentic AI and space exploration and humanity and all kinds of stuff. So if you like that sort of thing, I'm going to recommend the Bobverse. Shout out to my friend Espen. I know he's read it as well. And I think there's like six books in the series. And it's really kind of a really cool, I don't know, interesting approach. I just really like it. I know I've talked about it before on the show and other episodes, but Bobiverse, Bobiverse, Bobiverse are the ones that I would check out.
Mhm.
Jim, how into sci-fi are you? Because I feel like you're not so much into the sci-fi side of things.
Not really. I feel like I feel like I live in sci-fi, or that, in the next few years, with everything that's happening with AI, how quickly it's going, moving toward AGI, um, everything that's happening with robots and self-driving cars. Think about it. I mean, we're of the generation where we grew up and we actually would watch black and white TV sometimes, or we had color TV, but most people didn't have like color TVs in every room with a flat screen. And, you know, so I already kind of feel like we're living a sci-fi a little bit. Now, I do want to send a shout out to one thing. So it's not a book that I've been reading, but are you guys familiar with simulation theory?
That the fact that we might be living in a simulation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that makes me wonder, like, okay, well, things can't be that bad if we're just living in a simulation.
Well, I mean, it depends on the simulation. The entire story of the Matrix is essentially about living in a simulation. And
Yeah.
if you
Well,
follow the Matrix closely, which I do, right? There were many versions of the Matrix. The first was, ideally a utopia and everyone was supposed to get along, and the human mind rejected it. So they went
yeah.
the other way. So who knows? Are we?
Well,
I don't know.
I went out for a walk last night, and there's somebody who has like a bunch of Jeeps and stuff, and they have all these Star Wars stickers, and one says Sith Security. I'm like, I know that's Star Wars, but I have no idea what it is. And I kind of thought at the time it might come up in the podcast today. So I just wanted to let you know, like, I'm not into sci-fi. I've never seen a Harry Potter movie. I've never seen any of those things.
Well, first
Star Wars
of all,
or anything.
only a Sith deals in absolutes. So that's your first mistake right there. But shout out to that bumper sticker. I think that's a great one. I'm getting the sense, Jim, that like us recording this podcast virtually is about as sci-fi as you get. Is that fair?
I mean, that's pretty sci-fi, right? I mean, could you imagine having done that when you were like a kid? We used to like record into tapes and splice it, or you'd sit there and you'd listen to the radio station and hit record when a new song was coming on. If it was one that you wanted, you'd keep recording. If it wasn't, you'd rewind and try to get right to the point on the tape. I mean, think about that to where we are today. I mean, yeah, we're living in sci-fi.
Jim, you're an old man. You're talking about black and white TVs. You're talking about making mixtapes on the stereo. Gal, I don't even know where to take like the rest of this conversation. Any comment from you, Gal, before we close out?
No, it was an excellent discussion, and happy to catch up on that sci-fi book recommendation. Next time we'll meet. But thank you for hosting me in this episode. Absolutely enjoyable.
Well, we appreciate
Thanks,
it. Yeah, thank you so much for sponsoring, and definitely get out on the website, show support for PlainID, who's showing support for us here. PlainID.com/IDAC. We'll have links in our show notes for that, as well as, Gal, to your LinkedIn profile, so people can reach out either with sci-fi book recommendations or questions around anything BAC or maybe even AC, access control at this point. Certainly appreciate it. So for that, we'll go ahead and leave it for this week. Thanks, everyone, for watching or listening. You can find us on the web, idacpodcast.com, and we'll talk with you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.